The story begins with a man named Gong who has to board a spaceship for a mission to research abnormalities in his brother-in-law's sperm. Gong was actually forced to do this mission because he was forced by his father-in-law. If he fails to carry out this mission, then Gong must resign and sever ties with his wife. In this mission, Gong, who is a space tourist and had to pay 70 billion won to become a space tourist, was accompanied by an astronaut named Kim and an astronaut commander named Santi. Elsewhere, it is seen that Gong's wife, Choi Go-yoon, is forced to follow her father's wishes to attend the anniversary of her brother's death and ignore her own wishes of witnessing her husband's departure. Apparently, Choi Dong-hun, who was Choi Go-yoon's older brother, died due to an accident that occurred when Dong-hun visited the construction site. The late Dong-hun's wife told her father-in-law that she had sent her husband's sperm and eggs into space for safe examination. Meanwhile, the plane that Gong was on will be flown from Kazakhstan and monitored by a team of experts and also a team of doctors to ensure that the three of them will arrive in space safely from the Mission Control Center. Before departure, the IOU Mission Control headquartered in Switzerland asked what song Gong would like to listen to before takeoff, so that he would be calmer about his flight into space. But because Gong was too panicked, he didn't know what song he wanted to listen to. Long story short, the spacecraft was finally launched even though it was hit several times by lightning strikes. Gong, who was very panicked, experienced space sickness, and because the plane had left the Earth and was not affected by gravity, the items there floated in the air. Gong, who looked out the window, saw the corpse of an astronaut floating in the air, and it made him feel nauseous and vomited the contents of his stomach. In a semi-conscious state, Gong recalls the day he was born into the world, and then lost his mother, and finally he was cared for by his 3 aunts who are now his mothers. To raise and educate him, his 3 aunts worked in a bar even though sometimes they weren't paid by naughty customers, and Gong was forced to step in to beat up the men. During my time as an obstetrician, I can't count how many mothers Gong helped give birth to, and it always made his heart flutter. Until one day, Gong had a patient named Choi Dong-hun who came with his wife who had undergone a sperm injection procedure, but it turned out he had a genetic abnormality in his sperm. At that time, Choi Dong-hun begged Gong to improve his condition, and he promised to give Gong anything. Gong thought back to his meeting with his wife. At that time, Gong's car, which was stopped at a red light, was suddenly hit by Go-yoon from behind. Gong wants to hold Go-yoon responsible because his car was damaged. But suddenly, he saw blood coming out of Go-yoon's body, so Gong took her to the hospital. Apparently, Go-yoon had an ectopic pregnancy which required surgery. Apart from that, Go-yoon also doesn't know that she is currently pregnant. Gong only found out that the woman who had hit him was Choi Go-yoon, who is the heir to the MZ group after Go-yoon took off her glasses. Even though Go-yoon asked Gong to keep the operation a secret, Mr. Choi finally found out that his daughter had lost her future baby, and this made him very angry at Gong who had operated on his daughter. Because of this incident, Gong was finally fired, and not a single hospital wanted to accept him to work. After becoming unemployed, Go-yoon met him and said that she liked Gong. Since then, the two of them had a relationship and finally got married. Remembering all these incidents, Gong choked until he finally became unconscious. This made the controllers at the Mission Control Center panic, especially after the plane was hit by an unknown object, which caused the fuselage to spin violently. Kim tried to remove the object that was blocking Gong's respiratory tract, causing her leg, which was resting on a wheel, to suffer quite a deep wound. But in the end, she managed to remove the piece of apple that was blocking Gong's respiratory tract, and Gong was saved. When Go-yoon was thinking about her husband's condition on his mission this time, she was approached by an IOU employee who told Go-yoon that Kong Kang-soo had called her. Kong Kang-soo is Go-yoon's ex-boyfriend, who is a fruit fly researcher who is currently in space. Kong Kang-soo called to tell Go-yoon that Go-yoon's father still liked him and that he wouldn't let go of Go-yoon if Gong wasn't better than him. Gong looked back at the window and asked the supervising doctor about the astronaut's corpse that he saw earlier. The doctor explained that it was not an astronaut's corpse, but a satellite made from an astronaut suit. They recycled astronaut suits worth 14 billion won that had been thrown away into a satellite in space. Park Dong-ah, who is Eve Kim's lover, told how he used to wear those clothes and thought that he would never return to Earth and would never get married. Park Dong-ah actually no longer works there, but he deliberately came to see Eve Kim's first flight as commander. The mission leader told Eve Kim to go upstairs and rest. They then turned off the camera that connected the plane to the control room on Earth. Gong Ryung, seeing that Eve Kim's leg was still bleeding, intended to stitch up the wound. But he lost the anesthetic he was carrying, which flew off somewhere. After having difficulty inserting the surgical thread because his hands were shaking, Eve Kim finally helped him and inserted the thread into the needle that would be used to sew up the wound on Eve Kim's thumb. Eve Kim had to endure pain because the operation was carried out without anesthesia. However, after finishing sewing, Gong Ryung praised that Eve Kim's big toe looked beautiful. The arrival of Gong Ryung and Expedition Team 3 in space is something that is eagerly awaited by the Korean people, especially by Mr. Choi and Gong Ryung's 3 aunts. When the research team was preparing to welcome the arrival of Expedition Team 3 with several cameras because it would be broadcast live throughout the world, they had to wait a while because Eve Kim's gaze suddenly fell on several fruit flies flying towards her, especially when the flies then mated. Eve Kim was even willing to wait 20 minutes for the fruit fly to finish its work, making Mr. Choi, who was waiting for the video of Ryung's arriving in space, furious, as were the experts at the Mission Control Center. After putting the 2 flies into a tube, Eve Kim and Gong Ryung finally opened the hatch and they entered the spacecraft. Gong Ryung, who is not used to living in a place without gravity, continues to hold Eve Kim's legs to balance his body. Santiago brought a box of fruit as a souvenir and shared it with the researchers there. Meanwhile, Eve Kim distributed several lottery tickets to her friends. On the other hand, Min Jong, who saw that Gong Ryung had landed in space, remembered when he handed over Santiago's research, which stated that her bent sperm could be repaired in space because there was no gravity there, which made her body stressed and disturbed. Minjong wants her husband's sperm to be repaired and then injected into her eggs through an IVF procedure. Then, at his suggestion, Mr. Choi sent Gong Ryung into space to do it. Gong Ryung opened a box containing 6 glasses of ice cream, which would be distributed to the researchers there. Then he remembered again when Mr. Choi told him to smuggle Minjong's egg without telling the authorities that Gong Ryung took the object into space. Gong Ryung refused to do that because he believed that AIOU would definitely oppose Mr. Choi's wishes of creating life in space. But Mr. Choi said that Gong Ryung only needed to smuggle Minjong's eggs because he had already sent Dong Hun's sperm on a cargo ship. Gong Ryung continues to refuse Mr. Koi's desperate wishes because his bloodline will be cut off after Dong Un has an abnormality and Goen will no longer be able to get pregnant. Mr. Choi even knelt before Gong Ryung so that the doctor would do what he wanted. Even though he remained firm in his stance, Gong Ryung finally gave up when faced with Min Jong, who really wanted a child. Gong Ryung opened the box of ice cream, which was immediately taken by Kong Kang-soo, who was there. Gong Ryung brought several ice cream flavors according to the researchers' favorite foods because he had studied the characters of each of them. When there were only 2 glasses of ice cream left, Gong Ryung intended to give mango-flavored ice cream to Eve Kim, while for himself, Gong Ryung chose vanilla flavor. But Eve Kim didn't immediately accept the ice cream, and instead she asked whether Gong Ryung had declared that he was bringing the ice cream, considering that space tourists are only given a small kit to store their items, and he has to pay a high price according to the weight of the items he carries. Eve Kim found it strange why Gong Ryung brought the ice cream as a souvenir for the researchers when just to get there, Gong Ryung had spent a lot of money. After finishing her sentence, Eve Kim immediately took the vanilla-flavored ice cream instead of the mango flavor that Gong Ryung offered her. In fact, it was in this glass of vanilla ice cream that Gong Ryung smuggled Minjong's egg, which would be fertilized in space. Gong Ryung immediately chased Eve Kim, who put the ice cream in a warm place because she wanted to check whether the ice cream contained any dangerous ingredients. Eve Kim, as commander of Expedition 3, must ensure every small detail of her crew's actions to ensure security there. Because of that, Eve Kim asked whether Gong Ryung had declared that he brought the ice cream. Gong Ryung said that he had already declared it and AIOU knew about it. But Eve Kim was still suspicious because Gong Ryung brought 6 glasses of ice cream even though there were only 5 people on the crew. If calculated, Gong Ryung had to pay at least 10 million won for one ice cream he brought. Because of that, Eve Kim was suspicious of why Gong Ryung would pay that much for them. Eve Kim is worried that Gong Ryung has smuggled something in the ice cream and intends to harm the astronauts. Even though Gong Ryung tried to explain that he had no bad intentions, Eve Kim didn't believe him and still put the ice cream in a warmer, which made the ice cream melt. Gong Ryung tried to take the ice cream, but Eve Kim pointed a gun at Gong Ryung's head, then took some of the ice cream and examined it. Fortunately, no suspicious objects were detected in the ice cream, so Eve Kim let go of Ryung's. Gong Ryung immediately took the ice cream and immediately finished it. Eve Kim, who wanted to taste the ice cream, snatched it from Gong Ryung's hand, then crumpled the glass and threw it in the trash. As soon as Eve Kim left the place, Gong Ryung immediately took the ice cream glass to take Min Jong's egg cells, which were stored there. But how surprised Gong Ryung was because he didn't find Min Jong's egg cells in the glass. Apparently, Min Jong's egg was already in the hands of Kong Kang-soo, who had been ordered by Mr. Choi to carry out the fertilization process on the egg, and made Gong Ryung only a courier to deliver the egg. Goen immediately contacted Gong Ryung and said that her father had deceived them all because Kong Kang-soo was the one who would fertilize the egg. Gong Ryung went straight to the Kang-soo's place to get the egg. But Kang-soo was adamant about not wanting to hand over the egg, and he blamed Gong Ryung for killing his child before it was even born. Kang-soo asks Ryung's Gong to surrender because Goen is his. Moreover, Kang-soo has been in space for 1 year, which makes him already used to zero gravity compared to Hong Ryung who just got there. Gong Ryung remembered again when he asked Mr. Choi to declare his research if he succeeded in fertilizing Min Jong's egg cells and creating a fertility clinic in space, so that people who had difficulty having children had the opportunity to have a child. At that time, Mr. Choi thought that Gong Ryung only wanted to marry Goen so he could live comfortably. But Gong Ryung asked for this because he had to risk his life to carry out the conception. On the other hand, one of the male mice studied by Eve Kim became angry and attacked other mice. The male rat bit the female rat there because it was experiencing stress due to being separated from its mate on Earth. The team leader told Eve Kim to kill the rat because its existence was deemed useless and considered a danger to the others. However, Eve Kim and Seung Joon refused the order because according to them they had to think about how to survive there together. Suddenly, the rat had a heart attack and his life was barely saved. Seung Joon tries to help the rat, but the rat's heart still won't beat. Gong Ryung, who once helped a human baby with almost the same condition, dissected the rat's heart and performed a direct heart massage. No one is sure that Gong Ryung can help the rat, but a miracle happened and the rat's heartbeat suddenly returned. This news was immediately broadcast on television on Earth by Chief Kong, and Eve Kim, who were very happy, immediately hugged Gong Ryung. Kang-soo deliberately told Eve Kim to buy a lottery ticket to divert their attention, so he could inject Min Jong's egg cells, while his friends were waiting for the lottery winner to be announced. Eve Kim then came to Gong Ryung's room and told him to eat together. Eve Kim also entrusted her fruit flies to Gong Ryung because, according to her, Gong Ryung's room was the safest place to keep the flies because if Kang-soo saw them, Kang-soo would definitely take them straight away. Mina Lee, who was looking for a monitor to watch the announcement of the lottery winner, suddenly saw a lottery that said "Stay by my side." Mina Lee then saved the lottery for her. When everyone was focused on the lottery draw, Kang-soo pretended he was going to make coffee for them. However, he went to his room and managed to inject 7 of Min Jong's eggs. Meanwhile, Goen returned to her father and asked him to return Min Jong's egg to Gong Ryung. But Mr. Choi didn't care about his daughter and daughter-in-law and was more interested in seeing the lottery draw. Gong Ryung, who didn't see Kang-soo, then looked for him, but Kang-soo, who realized Gong Ryung's presence, immediately stopped his work and left the room carrying coffee. Gong Ryung then entered the room to look for Min Jong's egg cells, but he failed to unlock the cryogenic freezer because he didn't know the password. Eve tells Gong Ryung that tomorrow morning she and Kang-soo will be leaving the space station because they have to repair a panel that was damaged by hitting the suitsat. For this reason, Eve Kim advised Gong Ryung to remain calm at the station and not cause an accident. Considering that this mission is very dangerous, Gong Ryung hopes that Eve Kim will not leave the station and let Kang-soo do it himself. Gong Ryung remembered when he was making clothes for his space tour. Eve Kim explained that astronaut suits are made without joints, making it difficult to move, and there should be no leaks at all, because when they lose oxygen from the clothing holes, they will not survive more than 30 seconds until they finally die. As commander, Eve Kim is ready to be the first person to die in order to carry out tomorrow's mission. Hearing that, Gong Ryung asked why Eve Kim didn't write a will before the mission was carried out. On the other hand, while at the hospital, Min Jong suddenly experienced pain in her stomach. Several doctors immediately took her to the treatment room for examination. The doctor who examined her advised Min Jong to take care of her health because the success of a space mission depends on her health. While in space, a person should exercise for at least 2 hours to maintain their calcium levels. Eve Kim appears to have written a will as suggested by Gong Ryung to her. Meanwhile, Kang-soo was listening to music before starting his mission. In his room, you can see a photo of Go-en with an inscription that says, "Stay by my side." Suddenly his phone rang and a call came in from Go-en telling him to immediately return the eggs he had stolen. A surprising thing happened to Mina Lee when she found out that the lottery she found yesterday turned out to be a prize winner of 500 billion won. Mina Lee immediately contacted her twin sister Donna Lee and told her the exciting news. Meanwhile, Gong Ryung, who kept trying to find the whereabouts of Min Jong's eggs, contacted his friend and asked how to open the cryogenic freezer. His friend, who had applied for space missions several times but was rejected, said that a centrifuge that was too hot could cause an explosion and a fire alarm would go off. Then mission control will turn off all power modules. The engine will stop and all locks will open. Then they would move all the experiments to another module before things got worse. Gong Ryung intends to use the treadmill there to start a fire so that the fire alarm will sound and the cryogenic freezer door will open. This mission is very dangerous because at zero gravity, a person's heart rate slows down and the oxygen carried by the blood decreases. If Gong Ryung forced him to do it, his heart could explode and his life would be lost. However, in order to retrieve the egg, Gong Ryung was determined to do it. When Gong Ryung sat alone in a corner of the station, Eve Kim came to him and gave him a will and showed him a pregnant fruit fly. Eve Kim told Gong Ryung to guard the fly so that the Kanzu wouldn't grab it. The two agreed to meet on Earth in a year. The astronauts are preparing to remove the damaged solar panel and put it in a trash can. Every detail of this activity has been prepared so that undesirable things do not happen. Before starting his mission, Gong Ryung called Min Jong and asked if Min Jong didn't mind if it was the Kanzu who did the action on the eggs. If Min Jong doesn't mind, then Gong Ryung will let Kang-soo do it. But Min Jong wanted Gong Ryung to do it. Because of this, Gong Ryung was determined to take back the eggs that had been stolen by Kang-soo. Gong Ryung then used the treadmill to trigger an explosion and the fire alarm sounded. Eve Kim and Kang-soo, who were about to remove the damaged panels from the station, received a message from Chairman Kong not to drop anything because the missing equipment would become projectiles that attacked the station. However, when opening a difficult screw, Eve Kim was almost thrown off her footing, making everyone very panicked. Luckily, Eve Kim was still able to return to her original position. Meanwhile, Gong Ryung continues to use Kang-soo's treadmill, causing mission control to detect that it is Kang-soo's heartbeat that is in trouble. Because of this, mission control told Kang-soo to immediately return to the station and leave Eve Kim alone to repair the panel. Even though he refused, Kang-soo finally returned to the station after hearing that the cryogenic freezer was open and mission control told Lee Seung-joon to immediately move all the samples to the main module before they melted. Before Seung-joon got there, Gong Ryung managed to take the egg and put it in a device to take photos. When Seung-joon got there and found out that it was Gong Ryung who was using the treadmill and caused an explosion, Donna Lee scolded him because what Gong Ryung did was very dangerous for him. Eve Kim, who heard this, defended Gong Ryung by saying that she was the one who told Gong Ryung to exercise. Gong Ryung was then taken to the crew room for treatment. At the same time as Gong Ryung's heart returned to stability, Kang-soo's heart also showed the same thing. Meanwhile, Eve Kim, who was going to tie up the damaged panel, lost the wire she had cut. When Eve Kim tried to reach the wire, her foot slipped off the footing, causing her body to be thrown and her clothes hook wrapped around the panel. Mission Control has Eve Kim holding on to anything Eve Kim can grab. Eve Kim managed to grab a panel, but unfortunately her glove got caught in a wire, causing a hole and leak. Leaks in astronaut suits can cause oxygen loss and are very dangerous for astronauts' lives. The commander told Eve Kim to return to the station immediately and ignore the panel problem. Soon Jun tries to bring the entrance to the station closer to Eve Kim's current position. Unfortunately, when she wanted to open the hook of her clothes, which were wrapped around the panel, Eve Kim's hand couldn't reach it. Sung Jun, who couldn't bear to see the condition of his commander, handed over control to Santi and rushed to Eve Kim's place. Meanwhile, Eve Kim's body temperature began to increase and her heart rate began to decrease. At the same time, Gong is reading the will that Eve Kim wrote for him.